Morning, everyone. I'm Pastor Dustin Abbott from Petawawa, Ontario, Canada, and I'm here today to give you your morning devotion. We're going to talk about the devil today and about his roar, his attempt to intimidate us. And our text passage is found in the book of 1 Peter chapter 5, where he says in verse 8, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." So Peter draws a corollary between Satan and a lion, and in particular, a roaring lion that is looking for prey that he can conquer. Now, the lion is called the king of beasts, or the king of the jungle, and is one of the most feared predators on the planet, because it's a very large and powerful cat that has a lot of tools at its disposal. Obviously, it has a great amount of strength, it has fierce claws, it has intense fangs that are designed for ripping and tearing. And of course, if it catches its prey, there's a good chance that it's going to take down that prey. But there's the if. The if is that very often, while lions do have a good amount of speed, their prey has two significant advantages. Often the prey is a little bit faster than what the lion is, but more importantly, it has more stamina, that if it can get out to a lead and it can keep running, the lion is a very large animal to be going at top speeds for any kind of length of time. And so if it doesn't catch its prey, probably within 2 minutes tops, then it's very likely going to give up in that pursuit. It's built for the quick rush, not for the long haul. And so if the prey has enough of a head start and the lion cannot catch it quickly, the prey will most of the time get away. The ironic thing is that by the numbers, statistically, lions are not particularly successful as hunters, and in many cases, it's more likely than not that the prey is going to get away. So Peter says that Satan is like that roaring lion, and that leads us to the roar. The roar, of course, is one of the more powerful sounds that is made in the animal kingdom, at least above the sea, and it has the ability to carry for miles. And that sound is so intense when a lion roars if you're nearby. And I've been in a couple of occasions at either zoos or animal parks, heard lions roar up close. And the strength of the roar of a male lion, you actually almost feel it more than you hear it. Your whole body resonates in response to it. And if unexpected, that roar is it can be a crippling thing. And so the lion roars as it begins its attack. It's springing upon the enemy, because in some cases that roar is enough to completely freeze its prey in its track and give them the lion that few seconds or even a split second that it needs to close enough gap to where it has the running start on its prey and has a better chance of success. And so the roar that Satan uses is a method of intimidation. It's designed to cause fear, to cause people to kind of shrivel up and to flee. And it can be disorienting. It could cause an animal to break away in panic from the herd, where the lion has a statistically much higher chance of achieving that. And so all of those areas of intimidation, of fear, are used by the lion and vastly help its success. And so in some ways, its greatest asset, at least in the initial phase, is not the fangs or the claws. In many cases, going after a gazelle or something similar, those animals have relatively few defenses. And even if the lion had less fangs and less claw, it could probably still successfully take down its prey. And so in some ways, the greatest weapon in its arsenal is that roar that has a unique ability to cause fear and to freeze its prey for just that split second of time, that moment of indecision and fear that allows it to be more successful in the hunt. And so that analogy is there in Scripture to help us to learn some things about Satan. Paul wrote that we're not ignorant of Satan's devices. And I think that that's a blanket statement, yes, but unfortunately, sometimes we are ignorant of Satan's devices when we shouldn't be. And Paul's point is rather that Satan's devices are predictable, because They are, shown repeatedly in Scripture and through life experience. And that if you become more, not only self-aware, but spiritually aware, you can become aware of seeing Satan's hand at work, when in other cases, sometimes people are far too, even as Christians, are far too oblivious that it's actually Satan at work and not some human adversary. And so it's really important that we start to be very cognizant, be conscious of Satan's devices and the methods that he uses. And of course, the roar, that intimidation, that fear, is something that he very often relies on. So what's the solution? Well, Peter says in the first words, be sober, be vigilant. So being sober means that you are not taking this lightly. You recognize the stakes that are here. That's not to say that we should be walking about in fear, obviously not, for God's not given us a spirit of fear. But rather, we should not take our salvation lightly. And I fear that that is one thing that people don't always get right, that they treat superficial things as if they are heaven or hell issues or eternal issues, and they treat eternal issues as if they are some kind of light or casual thing. And it's kind of sadly ironic how people, make mountains out of molehills, these little small and insignificant things. They make a big deal out of that. But the things that really matter, the things that come down to their salvation, their eternity, they play games with that. They want to know, well, can I still do this and go to heaven? Well, if you really understood the stakes here, it's kind of like asking, can I dance on the edge of this cliff face and not fall? Well, maybe you can, maybe you can't. The bigger question, though, is why would you? Why would you play games with something, where the stakes are so high? What's the advantage to come out of that? And I think that we need to think that way a little more often when it comes to issues that might affect our salvation. The better question is not, can I do this and get away with it? The better question is there any advantage to me doing this at all? And should I play around with something that could be eternally destructive? And I think those that are being sober recognize, no, it's just not worth it. This thing in life that I feel drawn to, but I recognize could be destructive. Why would I mess around with it at all? But he also said to be vigilant. That means to stay on your guard and to be aware of Satan's devices, to be aware of the methods that he used, and to utilize that information wisely. I am inspired to think of David, who had been an amazing warrior. I mean, I'm not aware of any point that Scripture records David losing on the battlefield, but rather we see overwhelming success after overwhelming success. And the Bible makes the point in the lead up to the story of his sin with Bathsheba, that it was the spring of the year and the time when kings go to war. In other words, this was a moment where David was doing something out of the ordinary for him. Typically in times past, he would be leading his army on their spring campaign, the most beneficial and likely time of the year to wage a war where you're going to, not a war of defense, but a war of offense, where you're going to where the enemy is, taking the battle to them. And so always before, David would be at the head of his troops, and it would be his personal valor and his military strategy, but also his reliance on God that would inspire the armies of Israel and lead them to victory. The Bible notes of him as a general, even long before he became king, that the people recognized that he led the people out and led them in. What that means is that he led them onto the battlefield and he brought them home. And he did that through his effective leadership as a man of war. And so it's very odd that here is an opportunity where his armies are going to battle and he's not. And so you have to question why. The Bible doesn't tell us explicitly, but the most likely causes are as follows. Perhaps he felt like he had done his part and that he was due a break. It was a moment of self-indulgence. Or maybe it was a bit of hubris to where his armies had been so successful and they had won so many times that he thought, why do I need to be there? The guys can take care of this on their own. Clearly there's some kind of shift to where he's a little bit more self-absorbed, self-indulgent, and he's not stepping up and seizing the moment as he has in the past. And of course, it's in that kind of moment where he's not vigilant, where Satan roars and catches David's attention, and he is lured into a very destructive trap. a trap after his adultery with Bathsheba and then the following cover-up that led to him ordering the murder, the assassination of her husband. And it unleashes this long series of events. It has a long story arc that is going to affect David's family again and again, leads to an eventual coup d'etat down the road from Absalom, with the chief advisor to him being Bathsheba's grandfather, and so on and so forth are the consequences that resonate out from this moment where David is morally crippled by his decision making. But it came because he was not being vigilant. His mindset had changed. And it's interesting because this very battle that is going on, it kind of carries on for a while. And Joab, after David has gone through losing a child and all of these things, Joab warns them, okay, we're ready for the final push. And essentially, if I go in there and I lead the people to victory and you're not there, it's going to damage your influence as their leader, as their king. And so David goes, the troops rally, and they have that final victory. And he's back on track, mentally and spiritually. But Satan struck in the moment where he was vigilant, where he was relaxed, where he was self-indulgent. We have to be really, really careful to learn a lesson from that about Satan's devices. To recognize that Satan doesn't strike very often when you're in church and you're, spiritually and mentally engaged, but rather Satan strikes in the moments of leisure very often, the moments where we have time to ourselves and we're a little more self-indulgent. And in that moment, Satan roars and we freeze and we're crippled by fear, and that's when he pounces. So we have to be careful to not allow ourselves to be in a position where Satan can take advantage of. I do want to say this as I come to a close. We have gone through a very difficult period over the last 13, 14 months in Canada and, of course, around the world when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. And particularly here in Canada, it's been basically since March of 2020, very few churches have operated as normal. And as a byproduct of that, there's a lot of people that have had to either learn some measure of self-sufficiency or have started to drift away from God and from the church. It's a moment where fear has crippled a lot of people, and I fear that Satan is feasting right now as that roaring lion. Don't allow him to feast on you. Recognize that regardless of what's going on in our world, God's still on the throne. He's still in charge. And this is not a time for us to become lax spiritually, but it's a time to be sober and to be vigilant, to recognize that Satan is a wrecking ball right now. He is destroying at whim, and it's time for the church and for us as individuals to take a stand and recognize that we're not ignorant of his devices, and we have the weapons of warfare to fight against him. And so become a person of prayer. And however you can engage with your church, do it with all of your might right now. Don't become lax spiritually. Don't become a pajama Christian right now. But rather, it's time to gird yourself up and put on the whole armor of God, recognizing that Satan is roaring and he is actively looking for those that he can destroy. You don't want one of those to be you. And I pray that this gives you some food for thought and encouragement for this day. We can be victorious against the roaring lion through Christ who gives us strength.